Did you know that 1/3 of food is never eaten? That's right, it becomes food waste, and it's a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions and lost resources, including money. Food waste is a big problem, but it's also a big opportunity for tech investors and innovators to develop solutions that create real impact. So where do you start? Turn to ReFed, the nonprofit that's helping innovators, investors, food businesses, and more make the most of the food waste opportunity. Learn more at refed.org. That's REFED.org. Welcome to the Spoon Podcast, where we talk to the builders and makers on the front lines of the food tech revolution. I'm your host, Michael Wolf. This week, we talked to Paul Shapiro, who first made a name for himself with his book, Clean Meat, which was really the first book to tell the story of the nascent cultivated meat industry. Since he published his book in 2018, Paul's gone on to start the Better Meat Co., a company focused on creating plant-based and mycelium-based alternative meat ingredients for hybrid meat products. Paul's strategy of focusing on hybrid products is a road less traveled in the fight to reduce our reliance on animal agriculture, but I think it's actually one of the smarter ones. We'll hear why he went down this route and how he's actually making a pretty big impact. Despite his focus on creating products that blend with animal meat and helps make them healthier for humans and better for animals, Paul's still a big advocate for the more futuristic approaches like cultivated meat. So we'll hear about that, how he got to start, and where he thinks it's all going. So let's get to my conversation with Paul Shapiro.
I am Paul Shapiro, the CEO of the Better Meat Co.
Before starting his company, Paul had spent most of his career working for organizations like the Humane Society, advocating for animal welfare as a lobbyist. And while he found this work extremely gratifying and still believes it's important work, around 2016, he started to reevaluate.
Around 2015 and 2016, I started getting very nervous that maybe food technology was going to do more than what I was doing, that maybe food innovation was going to do more to reduce humanity's reliance on animals as a food source than the work that I was doing. And I started reading about other types of ways that we used animals for millennia that came to an end.
Paul says history is filled with examples of how over time we moved away from using animals as technology. Horses pulling our carriages or using whale blubber to keep our lamps burning, for example. And so Paul eventually started thinking about how he could affect change in a way that he couldn't as a lobbyist by helping to build one of these new technologies that could make animal agriculture, in other words, raising cows, pigs, chickens, and other farm animals for human consumption, obsolete.
The problem was I didn't know what I could do. I viewed myself as a lobbyist, right? I didn't have a microbiology degree. I didn't have an MBA from Harvard. I didn't have millions of dollars to invest as a venture capitalist. I wasn't really sure what I could do. I just thought of myself as kind of like a dumb lobbyist who cared a lot about animal welfare, but my passion was not commensurate with my skill set that I thought would be needed. And so the first thing I thought was, well, maybe I'll write a book on this topic. And so it'll incentivize the actually smart people to do this, right? So if we got scientists and entrepreneurs and venture capitalists to direct their resources toward this type of a technology to replicate meat without animals, maybe that's how I would have an impact.
Paul had never published a book before, but he'd done plenty of writing, op-eds, columns, and other pieces you do as a lobbyist. And because he was so early to the topic and he pitched a book no one had actually written before, it didn't take long before a publisher became interested. Simon & Schuster picked up the book and Paul got to writing it. And as he researched it in 2016 and 2017, he learned something.
What I learned was that these people were mere mortals like myself. They were not these deities or demigods who I thought of them as. I thought if you're going to start your own company, you really have to have some type of special skill set that commoners like myself lacked. And it was at that point, after the book tour in 2018, that I decided, maybe instead of writing about these people who I thought were going to solve this problem that had been animating my life for the past few decades, I would simply become one of them myself.
So you were writing this first book ever about this space. You were fascinated by the technology, but you went a different direction and started essentially, at the time, a plant-based meat company. I think it's evolved a little bit, and we'll get to that, but you honed in on this new technology. Talk about that discovery process and how you started your first product.
Sure. Well, I wasn't sure where to start. I had passion. I thought that maybe I could raise some capital. And I was very pleased by the reception of the book, which had opened up a lot of doors for me. And because I had interviewed so many of these venture capitalists and other people involved in the food industry who now I knew, and I wouldn't have had a way of knowing them before. And so I had been interviewed at the time in 2017 on a podcast by our mutual friend, Adam Yee, He's a food scientist, and his podcast is called My Food Job Rocks. And uh, when Adam published this interview with me about the book, I asked him afterwards. I said, "Hey, listen, by the way, I'm trying to start a new company, and here's the idea. The idea was that we're going to make products that meat companies could blend into their meat to reduce their reliance on animals. The goal was not to create cultivated meat. It wasn't even to create plant-based meat. It was to create products that meat companies could use as a hybridizing agent for their meats." And I asked Adam, "Do you know any food scientists who might be interested in quitting their jobs, moving to Sacramento, and starting this company that has no money at all? And it is just an idea in my head right now. I don't even have a name for it." And he nominated himself for this task. And I knew at that time he was working at Isogenics, and so he was making various plant-based protein products, but they were mainly like supplements, like the athletes might take, and so on. And they weren't meat related. And so I asked him, let's get started and just test some things out remotely and see what you can come up with as prototypes. And so he started working on his own in his apartment in Arizona, and he was sending me products. And at the time, I didn't have a great way to evaluate how useful they were. So instead, I brought them to what at the time was called Hampton Creek, it now is Eat Just, and I gave it to their head of product development and asked him. I said, "Hey, is this useful for this product idea?" And he was very generous, and as a personal favor to me, he did it. And he said, "Actually, this worked better than expected." And so I told Adam, "Quit your job, come to Sacramento, let's start this." And we enlisted my friend Joanna Bromley, who actually did have a Harvard MBA and knew a lot more about running a company than either one of us did, to leave her job, which she had been a management consultant at Bain. So she worked at Bain for about 7 years, to come co-found the Better Meat Co. as well. And so we all were in Sacramento, and we started with plant-based formulations. These were combinations of plant fibers, proteins, fats, and flavors.
Had you raised money at that point, or at that point, did you put together the deck and start knocking on doors?
Yeah, it was more the latter. So we didn't have any money. We were not paying ourselves at first. So we were confident that we could raise money, but we knew we were going to have something to raise money on that was more than merely an idea in our heads. And so once we had all agreed that we were in, we started working on products, started giving it to restaurants and other customers, and working on a deck, and started meeting with investors. And what we found was, generally speaking, it was going to be a friends, family, and fools round, right? So this was not, the first pre-seed round was not funded by any venture capitalists, so to speak. It was funded by a lot of people who I knew from the animal welfare world who are philanthropists. And so these are people who are accustomed to donating to help animals. And I think for many of them that they really did view this as a donation, that they thought, in the past I've donated and the expectation is I get nothing in return. I'm maybe a tax write-off, but really, people who are into philanthropy, they're giving for the satisfaction of giving. They're giving because they want a return, but the return is not financial. The return is social change, right? You donate to get a better world for animals. In this case, people invest primarily because they want a return on their investment, right? They want to get more than they put in. But that initial, very first 2018 Friends, Family, and Fools round was a lot of those people who were like, "Listen, I hope to get a return on this investment, but I'm going to seed this thing, and I'm thinking of it as a philanthropic gift."
We like you, Paul. Good luck. Here's some money. I'm not expecting anything back.
Yeah, they didn't say the last part, but it was implicit. It was honestly implicit. And I hope to surprise them. I really hope to surprise them and get them a great return. But then once we started actually putting this product out on the market, we started selling it to Purdue Farms, the chicken company. And we worked with Purdue as a 3-person company. It was Adam, Joanna, and myself. And we went to Maryland. We met with them. We met with Jim Purdue and Chris Purdue and all their executives. We created formulations that worked really well for them. And they created a whole new product line called Purdue Chicken Plus, which is about 50% chicken, 50% plant-based, and started selling to them. And to this day, 5 years later, they still sell Purdue Chicken Plus. In fact, I would say it's the only hybrid product that has really succeeded. Tyson tried hybrids, they pulled it. Yeah. Maple Leaf tried hybrids, they pulled it. All these hybrid products that were introduced back then have been pulled, except for Chicken Plus from Purdue.
Why is that? Because I feel like you were one of the smart ones and went down this path of hybrid, because It automatically reduces the amount of animal that's going into a product by 50%. And it still probably has a lot of the characteristics that people love. Why aren't more people doing this? And why are you the only one that's succeeded
Yeah.
so far?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to Purdue, not to me, but I will tell you first, we don't like the F word. It's not a filler, it's an enhancer. So it just makes the meat better, right? So think of it as kind of like, if you go to, let's say, Jamba Juice and they ask you, do you want to boost your smoothie with protein powder or matcha or hemp seeds or something, you don't perceive yourself as getting less smoothie, right? You're getting a better smoothie. You're willing to pay more because it's an enhanced smoothie. It's not like these are fillers. These are things you actually want. And that is the difference between Purdue Chicken Plus and some of these other products. Like if you look at what Tyson did, they marketed it as a less meat product. That is a sacrificial ask that you're asking people to make. Chicken Plus, you get chicken plus these other great plant nutrients that you want your kids to have. Whereas if you market a product as less meat, you're basically telling people it's less good. And people like meat. Meat is popular. So I wish that weren't true, but we have to accept the reality.
It's just a matter of how you framed it.
Yeah, first, Purdue framed it that way. We didn't. We're the
Right.
ingredient provider to them, so I have to give credit to them. But I think that's a very big part of it. If you looked at the Tyson product back then, which was called Raised and Rooted, it said Angus beef plus pea protein isolate. That was what was on the front cover of the package. Does anybody want that? Does that sound good? Pea protein isolate? And then the Maple Leaf product was marketed as a 50% less meat product. Less meat is not the message to sell meat. People want better meat, they want enhanced meat, but the idea of telling people there's less meat, the meat is something good to most people. Maybe there's a small portion of people who want less meat, but for most people, that's not what they're going for. In the Purdue Chicken Plus aspect, it also has to do with the fact that these moms can give their kids chicken nuggets that the kids don't know have plant nutrition in them. Every serving of Purdue Chicken Plus has a quarter cup of vegetable nutrition in there, and it looks and tastes like a regular chicken nugget. And so it's almost like a stealth health approach for these kids. And so moms who want their kids to be eating more veggies end up getting that in there. The product has less saturated fat, less cholesterol. It's better meat. It truly is better meat. And so I don't want to take credit for it. Again, I think Purdue is the one that did all the marketing. They had a CMO at that time named Eric Christensen who came up with all of this, and more credit to him. But I do think that the blended meat or hybrid meat space is getting a new second look from a lot of people who think like you do, Mike, that this is actually a good way to enhance sustainability.
How did you get a meeting with Purdue? You actually met with the Purdues, which is
Yeah.
Like with a 3-person company. Like that is an impressive task. Tell us that story.
I'm very proud to say that they contacted us. What happened was when we started the company, we put out a press release about the fact that the company existed, and that led to a couple stories in industry trade publications. There was nothing in the mainstream media about it, but that led Purdue to get in touch with us, and we started talking. And they invited us to come visit them and show us some prototypes, which we did. And we invited them to come out. Now, what's really funny was, we were trying to make it appear like, we were a legitimate company, not something that was started a few months ago by 3 people, right? And so we, at the time, didn't have our own office. We worked in a co-location office space, where you would...
WeWork?
It was a competitor of WeWork, yeah. And we didn't have our own office, though. We just worked there. And so we ended up renting like a hotel conference room to bring them to, so that they would meet us in a hotel conference room, so they wouldn't have to come see our modest office, so to speak. But anyway, they were great. They treated us with enormous respect, to be honest with you. They did. It was really nice. We were very happy to work with them. The process was lengthy, and we went through numerous iterations. I don't remember the number, but more than a dozen iterations of the formula before they accepted it as a method for hybridizing their meat.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I think we had a conversation. I think it was at the beginning of your journey towards delving into mycoprotein, towards your Rhiza mycoprotein. Talk about that. So essentially, you're on your second generation product. You're focused on that. Talk about that transition.
What the products that we were selling and still sell to Purdue are made of a combination of plant proteins, fibers, fats, and flavors. And it works very well for a seamless blend into chicken. We also had similar products for beef and crab and pork and so on. It became very clear, though, that there were a lot of limitations to using plant proteins. One is flavor. They have these off flavors that have to be masked with either maskers or excess flavors or other things. Two, it's many ingredients when a lot of companies are trying to shorten their ingredient text, not lengthen them. Three, companies have concerns about allergenicity if you're using soy or wheat, so you have to use pea, which is pretty expensive. And then we are having problems with pea volatility, and now that's even worse now because of the new tariffs on Chinese pea that have just been placed by the Commerce Department, where it's a 355% tariff to bring them into the U.S. And this is leading to a lot of people abandoning pea and just going back to soy and wheat, which are both common allergens. So the question was there a way to do something that was common allergen-free and actually better from a textural and flavor standpoint? And I knew about mycelium because of what Quorn, Quorn, had been doing. And I had followed Quorn because it was really interesting to me, because here you had these little tiny startups trying to cultivate animal cells in bioreactors, and yet Quorn has been growing food in bioreactors for decades, huge bioreactors.
Yeah.
The bioreactors that Quorn grows in are literally over 10 stories tall. They're incredible. I've been there, and it's like a mecca of bioreactors, right? They have many 150,000 liter bioreactors churning out a river of microbial proteins that come out of there. And so that's not because Quorn is so great in the cultivated meat people don't know what they're doing. It's a lot easier to grow fungi proteins than to grow animal cells. That's the basic gist of it. And so it's not easy, but it's easier than growing animal cells and cheaper. And I had wondered for a long time whether there were other species of fungi that you could grow that might have some advantages over Quorn. Because I had talked to the people from Quorn, and they said, well, this is what we found and we liked it. And they had tested it like back in the 1960s against other things. But it didn't seem to me that there had ever been like any real selection for production, right? I mean, it would be almost like, people think of mycoprotein as if it's like one thing, but that's only because Quorn is 99% of the market, and it is one thing. It's a strain called Fusarium venenatum. Now, the issue with Fusarium venenatum, it's great, it's wonderful. I like Quorn products, I eat them, I'm all for it. But imagine if you only had one plant protein to work with. You only had wheat protein. You didn't have soy or chickpea or fava bean or pea protein. Or imagine if we only had one animal species, like people only ate cows, they didn't eat pigs or chickens or fish or crabs or whatever. That would be a very different world. And so I was wondering, are there other microbial fungi that might be better? And I gave a talk in 2018 at the Cultured Meat Symposium, and there was a gentleman in the audience who was a mycologist, and he told me that he had been screening various strains of mycelium and had some ones that he really liked, and he wanted to show them to me. And one thing led to another, and we ended up hiring him at our company. And he at that time was working by himself in a lab in Oakland. So he was just, a one-man band, so to speak. And I told him, hey, listen, at that time we had raised $1.6 million, which, today sounds very little, but at that time made us, we felt like kings. And so I told him, I said, listen, he was self-funding everything. He didn't have any investors. He was just, paying for everything with some money he had made in the crypto market. And so I told him, I was like, hey,
amazing.
Yeah. I told him, like, why don't you just do this under the Better Mico banner, and we'll start a mycelium program. And to make a long story short, he did. And so we started a mycelium program, and that has now advanced into something that is miles ahead of where we were back then, which was, in 2018, 2019, where we have over 100 strains, and we grow numerous types of fungi and create all types of really interesting meat alternative ingredients. And the benefit of what we're doing is that we now have honed in on a particular workhorse strain for us that produces something that is much more meat-like than Quorn's product, that doesn't have to be frozen like Quorn's product has to be frozen. This can be sold at a dry, shelf-stable, ambient temperature, so you can ship it anywhere around the world. And it can be used as a single ingredient. Quorn has to be mixed with other ingredients, whereas this can be used as a single ingredient. And so we went ahead and filed for GRAS, not only with the FDA, GRAS being generally recognized as safe, not only with the FDA, but if you look at the GRAS notices on mycoprotein, there have been 3 successful ones in the United States prior to us. One was corn, which was decades ago, which was Fusarium venenatum. Another was Enough, which is another mycoprotein company based in Europe using the identical strain as corn. So they just filed a GRAS notice on the species that had already been approved. Then Nature's Fine did a GRAS notice on Fusarium flavolapis, so a new strain of Fusarium. So corn, Enough, and Nature's Fine are all using Fusarium strains. We, though, are using a strain of a genus that's called Neurospora, and no Neurospora species have been approved as GRAS by FDA before. So we did a lot of research, and we did not want to conduct any animal experiments for animal welfare reasons. And we met with FDA over this. They don't legally require it, but everybody has done it before in the past. And so we want to figure out how could we do this without conducting animal experiments. And the FDA basically told us that you don't legally have to, but it's common practice too. And if you don't, here are some things that we think that you might want to do that will go above and beyond to showcase the safety of your ingredient. So we did all this. It took us a long time, but we filed with the FDA. And we also asked for USDA approval to put this into animal meat because the other Fusarium strains that have been GRAS certified are not approved by USDA for putting into meat. As most people listening to this will probably know, FDA regulates primarily, generally speaking, plant-based products. USDA, generally speaking, does animal-based products. And so if you read these other GRAS applications, they explicitly say they are not intending to put their mycoprotein into animal meat, whereas we said we explicitly are going to put it in. And so I'm very proud to say that in just about a month ago, we got notice that not only did FDA have no questions about our GRAS notice, therefore we are now not just self-affirmed GRAS, but actually FDA GRAS, but also USDA recognized our Neurospora as the first and only mycoprotein that is safe and suitable for inclusion in animal-based meat.
At the time, when we talked 3 years ago, you were using the term Rhiza, R-H-I-Z-A. Is that the commercial name for this particular strain that you're commercializing?
Yeah, that's a commercial name that we gave to it. It's Greek for root, like we're getting to the root of the problem, and mycelium is like the root-like structure of fungi. But if anybody has a better name, we're very open to it. We have trademarked the name Rhiza, but I'll keep it real with you, just between us, since this is such an intimate conversation. Don't tell anybody, Mike. But I actually don't like the name Rhiza. I think it's a bad name, and if somebody has a better name, please contact me, and we'll give you something.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Before the GRAS notice, you were not able to essentially scale this and sell it and have consumers eat it in a product in the US, correct? Is that correct?
Well, we had self-affirmed GRAS, so we could do it. To be blunt with you, Mike, the bigger problem for us was that was a problem, was big food companies didn't want to buy it without having the FDA's GRAS
stamp of approval, essentially.
Stamp of approval on it. But smaller companies were willing to, and we would sell to them, and we still do. And we sell our product into restaurants and to other companies, like I mentioned, Oshi, et cetera. However, it's not a secret. I'll just tell you, like, the bad news was that we did get embroiled in an IP dispute with another startup in our space. And that had a major deterrent on fundraising. And thankfully, that concluded with a satisfactory outcome for us at the Better Meat Co. But it still was a diversion, right? I mean, we're happy with the outcome, but the reality is that it would have been better had this not existed, because it definitely inhibited our fundraising abilities. And so that is now concluded. It's behind us. And the Better Meat Co. is going to, beginning in September, go out and raise a new round of funding, kickstart a new round of funding, for which the use of funds will be to scale our technology up. We already run in a 9,000 liter bioreactor, which we operate continuously, but we need to build something way bigger, maybe 10 to 20 times bigger, in order to get to a place where we can start making tens of millions of dollars of revenue, which is where we need to get. And so if you look at corn, they have multiple 150,000 liter reactors. We're going to build just one to start, but we can always add more and more of them. And what's really nice about this is, unlike with cultivated meat, where nobody has built reactors anywhere near that size to grow animal cells, the largest mammalian animal cell culture reactor in the world is only 20,000 liters. And yet we know, because of corn, that you can do this at much, much higher levels. And so that's what we're going to do.
Is this a piece of hardware that is out there? Maybe there's like a big bioreactor maker that essentially makes product for corn that you're going to have this come out and make it for you, or is this like a custom build?
Well, bioreactors of this size are never off the shelf. There's always going to be a custom build because people will have different reactor designs, and our reactor design is different from Corn's. And so you would have a different design that had to be purpose built for you, but it would be the same type of a engineering firm that would do it, right? So you could use Corn's, or you could use other ones. I mean, people build these big bioreactors all the time for citric acid production and other types of xanthan gum. Those are two large industrial fermentation products. So you could go to any of them, but I think you would be wise to go to people who at least had some experience with fungal fermentation, which is very different from doing like bacterial or algal fermentations, which are also done at a very large scale sometimes.
But it sounds like the guys are bending the metal who are going to do this for you. You're going to go to one who's used to making big equipment for like a corn, and it's
Yeah.
probably a lot less of a task than like the folks trying to make something for Upside, which is a much more newer
Right.
area.
Well, yeah. So nobody's ever done it before. That's the key in that in cultivated meat. Nobody's ever done it ever that at that scale. And so you're basically making novel inventions along the way, and you're hoping that it'll work. Now, I'm rooting hard for them. I really want them to succeed. But what you said, Mike, is correct. There's far less risk in doing this as far as fungi fermentation is concerned, because there's great companies that make Corn's reactors and that make Cargill's and ADM's reactors and CP Kelco's reactors. Like these are gigantic reactors, hundreds of thousands of liters that are running fermentations all the time. So it's just it's cheaper, easier, less risky, and way more literature on these types of fermentation systems than on trying to grow mammalian cells in anything like this.
You talked about how the space is getting kind of a new look, the hybrid space. You talked about how companies are looking at maybe developing shorter, more natural, recognizable ingredient lists. I thought it was interesting this past week with Beyond Meat coming out with their Sun sausage. It seems like this is the first time from this company they've said, "Hey, our original plant-based formulation, which a lot of people viewed as highly processed, we can argue about that all day. I think like there's a lot of misinformation out there, but it seems like they took a lesson that said, "Hey, we need to maybe make another approach." And another part of that was interesting to me is they said they're basically framing it as something that doesn't taste exactly like meat. And I think
Right.
that's a big admission as well. They're basically not, they're saying, "Hey, we're not doing a direct meat clone, but we're doing something that can fill that and satiate that need, but it's a little bit different."
I am so eager to find out if this works. So, first of all, the question is it cheaper, right? Is this more expensive or cheaper than meat, or more expensive or cheaper than their conventional Beyond Meat products? That's my first question about it. Second, is this what people want? And we'll find out. I don't care what people eat if they're eating something other than meat. That's great. I hope, it doesn't matter to me. And if you look at the examples that I gave earlier of where animals have been displaced in the economy, it's never by an exact replica, right? It's not like the fountain pen is a mimicry of
Mm-hmm.
quills, right? It's not like they came up with a fake. It's like Henry Ford made a mechanical horse that just ran faster, right? Like they came up with things that were different but better. And so I'm firmly convinced of the argument that you do not need to necessarily mimic meat, but you need something that is better in some way, tastes better, is cheaper, or something else that is going to make people want it more than meat. And maybe there'll be a cool new novel food category that we haven't even contemplated. I'll give you an example. If you think about cheese, it's really new on humanity's timeline. Think about all the things that had to happen before we had cheese.
Right.
You
Right.
had to domesticate cows, which happened a blink of an eye ago. You had to, start milking them, and then you had to figure out how to make milk curdle, which at that time could only be done by storing it in a calf's intestine, which had rennet, to make it curdle. That is how you got cheese. And so it's only thousands of years ago that cheese was invented, and now it's a standard part of a lot of humans' daily diet. You go to the supermarket, and there's hundreds of types of cheese, but a blink of an eye ago, cheese didn't exist. Nobody had ever fantasized about brie or Gouda or Swiss or cheddar or whatever. And the same may be so. Like maybe the types of technologies that we're talking about today through microbial fermentation or animal cell culture are going to create not just things that mimic the current product categories, but actually create new products that people will want to add to their diets that people haven't even dreamt of yet. And wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't it be cool to have new foods? Like I would love to think about like the cell cultured turducken, right? So you could have like instead of
Yeah.
a chicken, instead of a duck, instead of a turkey, you take the cells of those animals and grow them all together, and you have a new type of meat. So it's not just one stuffed inside of another and another, but they're actually interwoven cell structures. Like the matrix is there together, and that creates a novel culinary experience that no human has ever experienced before. Wouldn't that be awesome? Or maybe like if you have your own tabletop meat maker where you can order little bags of spores from a company like the Better Meat Co. and we can ship them and you'll put them in to your kitchen top meat maker. And the next day you come back and you have your own protein that you just grew right on your kitchen counter. People have bread makers and ice cream makers, which was, science fiction 100 years ago. And now if you went to your friend's house and they had it on their kitchen table, it would be not even remarkable that they had a bread maker or an ice cream maker on their kitchen table.
The tabletop meat maker from Better Meat Company arriving 2050 for the holidays.
Right. Yes, exactly right. We'll take your payment today, but it'll arrive 30 years from now. I mean, it's hard to predict the future, obviously, but I think considering that 25 years ago, the idea that we'd all have supercomputers in our pockets, whether you're rich or poor, would be pretty unfathomable. And now I was talking with a gentleman who lives on the street the other day, and he had 2 iPhones, not even one. He had 2. I don't know where he got them, but this guy had 2 iPhones. It's like we all have these supercomputers at our fingertips, whereas 25 years ago, that was nowhere on the conception, at least for somebody like me. So what might happen 25 years from now? I don't know, but a kitchen countertop meat maker sounds pretty awesome.
I don't know where I'm at right now with cultivated meat, though. I feel like, I was down in San Francisco in April. I had a tasting with Sci-Fi Foods, and it's like 1% of it was their cultivated meat cells. And then like 99% was like plant-based. And like they spent how many millions of dollars to get to that 1%. And they obviously, the story of them is they declared bankruptcy. But with what you're doing, it just seems like if we could get so close with mycelium, if we can do a plant-based team to make something taste more meat-like, why are you still such a big believer in cultivated meat? And I'm not saying I'm not. I'm just like, why are you still such a big believer? Because there's so much capital to make this happen that is required.
You're asking such an astute point, Mike, and I'll answer it directly. But I first want to say, I believe that it's possible that cultivated meat will not succeed. I believe that it is possible that the implication of where you were going with that thought is accurate, that it may be that this just can't scale up economically. They still have not proven that it can. But lots of things happened that a lot of people thought they wouldn't be able to do that they have done so far. Many predictions were made that they have shown were false. And so the reason why I am enthusiastic about it is the same reason that I'm enthusiastic about fusion nuclear. Fusion nuclear, if it works, is an unbelievable solution to the energy crisis that we face. It would answer almost every problem that we have with energy if you could make it work. For a long time, people didn't even know if it was physically possible for us to achieve fusion nuclear on Earth. Now we know it is possible. And the companies in that space, like Commonwealth and other fusion nuclear startups, are commanding billion-dollar valuations, even though they're not going to have any energy going into the grid until the 2030s, because that's how big it could be if they succeed. But I would not support investing only in fusion nuclear. I would say, hey, listen, solar and wind and geothermal are way more likely, and nuclear and fission nuclear are way more likely to be clean energy solutions in the near term rather than fusion nuclear. But I still hope that there will be people who make bets on fusion because it could be such an amazing solution. And the same is so. Just like wind, solar, geothermal, et cetera, are really important and they're being used today, mycoprotein and plant proteins, I believe, are the same thing. Very promising. They might get the job done on their own. But if you really could grow actual animal meat without animals at economic, scaled up production, it would be such an amazing solution. So even though I think it's less likely to succeed, even though I think it's not likely to have any real dent on the problem until the 2030s, I still think it is worth pursuing.
And there could be breakthroughs, right? There could be, I had a chance to talk with the CEO of Prolific. I think the company is basically essentially using light to switch on the growth for meat cells.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
really
a
cool.
completely different approach than what we've seen before. They aren't using this big swirling stew of cells. They're actually using light to essentially kind of turn it off and off and on and off. And they say it's going to be much more scalable, much more affordable. So like there might be the breakthrough we don't know about yet.
I totally agree. In fact, I would think that the only way cultivated meat ever scales is if there are breakthroughs that we don't know about yet, because with current technology, it will not work at scale economically. You have to get cheaper bioreactors, cheaper feedstock, better cell lines, better growth rates, better titers, and so on. But imagine, instead of talking about chicken cells, let's talk about chickens. Chickens 100 years ago, these were animals who took more than 100 days to grow to slaughter weight. This is why very few people ate chicken back then. You may remember from history class that Herbert Hoover ran on the campaign slogan, "A chicken in every pot on Sunday," right? Like that was the aspiration for Americans to once a week be able to eat chicken. Now people eat chicken every day because through a whole variety of science and R&D, they've made chicken really cheap by getting them to grow really, really fast. And if you would ask somebody 100 years ago, what do you think that it would take to get chickens to grow to slaughter weight in 40 days? They would have looked at you like you were a Martian. And today, that's what happens. Now, it's at the expense of the chicken because they suffer immensely by being forced to grow at that very rapid rate. They can barely even walk. It's very sad to see them. But the point is that chicken went from something that presidential candidates promised Americans could get once a week to now being a staple that people afford multiple times per day. And so if that's what we could do with chickens, what can we do with chicken cells? Today might be not just like the chicken of 100 years ago, but maybe the chicken of 1,000 years ago. Like the cells that they're growing are not domesticated cells. These are essentially, cells that have not been tamed, so to speak, to grow in these conditions. And so maybe these companies, if they have enough resources, can figure out how to grow these cells a lot more efficiently. And I certainly hope they can. I don't think it's inevitable by any means. It is not going to be self-executing. But there are a number of people who are guzzling haterade right now on cultivated meat. And I think it is an unwise position to take. And I'm rooting for these companies. I don't want to do it myself because I want to have a dent in the 2020s, not in the 2030s. Well, I want to have a dent in the 2020s and the 2030s. But I hope they succeed. And if I were an investor, I would be making bets on multiple ways to solve this problem, not just on one.
Final question. Looking back in your career when you're done, what are you hopeful that you will have achieved?
Well, I hope to one day just be able to hang out with my wife and dog and not have to worry all the time about what's happening. There's a funny line that Ben Horowitz from the VC firm Andreessen Horowitz uses, which is that when you start your own company, you will sleep like a baby because you'll wake up every 2 hours and cry. And that has definitely been my experience for the last 6.5 years of running a company. I used to think, how could anybody ever walk away from this? Like how could you ever? And then you do it, and you're like, man, this is it's an uphill battle. But I do have the conviction that as I'm beating my head against the wall, that eventually the wall will break before my head. And so my goal is to actually make a tangible dent in the number of animals who are used for food. That is critical for improving animal welfare. It's critical for climate. It's critical for public health. It's critical for pandemic prevention and more. And so I don't know that I will be like a Henry Ford who renders the use of horses obsolete, but I certainly hope to be somebody who played a role in helping to shift humanity toward a direction where we are less reliant on animals for food. The problem is that we've got 8 billion of us today. Meat demand is going up, not down. We're going to have 10 billion of us within the next 30 years, presuming no catastrophes occur. And so meat demand is only going up, not down. And I hope that I'll be able to say at the end of my life that there was less suffering in the world because I had lived. The world is a better place because I had been born. That's why I am doing this. It is the North Star for me. It has been for the last 30 plus years of my life. And I hope one day that my wife and dog and I are sitting on the beach somewhere and looking back and thinking, yes, actually, there is less suffering in the world because of what we did.
Less crying and banging your head against the wall, more sitting on the beach and looking back. All
right. Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work to try to help chickens and pigs and cows, but honestly, I'd rather just spend my time with dogs. So that would be a good outcome for me.
Hey, Paul, this has been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you spending time with me.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate all that you're doing at the Spoon.
That's it for the Spoon Podcast this week. Paul Shapiro with the Better Meat Company fighting the fight, showing you don't have to be a technologist or molecular scientist to build and do something in the space. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really does help, and we will read your review and give you a shout out in upcoming episodes. All right, folks, that's it for now. We'll talk to y'all soon. Did you know that 1/3 of food is never eaten? That's right, it becomes food waste, and it's a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions and lost resources, including money. Food waste is a big problem, but it's also a big opportunity for tech investors and innovators to develop solutions that create real impact. So where do you start? Turn to ReFed, the nonprofit that's helping innovators, investors, food businesses, and more make the most of the food waste opportunity. Learn more at refed.org. That's REFED.org.